Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, and remember, context is everything. Media Network founder and CEO John Michael is reading another textbook cover to cover. This is an American history textbook from the year 1940, before we entered World War II. This is an American history textbook, and we're on Chapter 10, Part 2, How Settlers Reached the West. The Western Trails. Americans had been going in great numbers to the Pacific coast long before the Civil War. They traveled across the Great Plains and over around the high mountains. There were three principal ways of reaching the West Coast. The Santa Fe Trail was the oldest. It started from the town of Independence in Missouri. This trail ran to the old town of Santa Fe in the present state of New Mexico. In 1849, the gold rush to California started, so the Santa Fe Trail was pushed on to Los Angeles, as is shown in the map. Number 2. Then there was the Southern Overland Trail. It started from either St. Louis or Memphis, and it ran far south across Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. It entered California along the Gila River. The Oregon Trail, the third one, was the most traveled. It too started westward at the Missouri River. When it came to the Great Salt Lake, it divided. One branch went northwest to Oregon, and another kept westward to California. Trace these trails on the map. There's the map for you. These trails were not laid out by highway engineers. Often the trail was one that had once been used by the Indians. Fur trappers coming into the region frequently followed the Indian trails. Then came the emigrant wagons, trains, and mail coaches making a rudder road over the old trail. Today, some of the fine concrete highways follow these old routes into the west. Today being 1940. Carrying goods, passengers, and mail. Freight trains. As the population grew, the Pacific Coast more and more supplies were needed. Some of these were sent by ship, but much goods was sent westward by overland freight train. The freight trains of these early days were not railroad trains. They were made up of many covered wagons, each drawn by 10 or 12 oxen. 20 or 25 wagons made up a freight train. The wagons carried articles which were manufactured in the East: shovels, hoes, picks, scythes, hammers, saws, nails, guns, pistols, powder, tobacco, blankets, and dozens of other items were carried into the West. These were stored in the body of the wagon under the canvas cover. The Indians had to be very strong to attack the freight train. The Western Stage. Passengers going to the West traveled by stagecoach. Just before the Civil War, the United States government determined to provide the people of California with regular mail service. A line of stagecoaches was planned. This line would carry both passengers and mail. The stages traveled day and night, stops being made to water the horses or to change teams. These stages were like those of the East, except they were less comfortable. They were probably of stronger build, for the stage had to travel over rough trail. Sending mail by stagecoach was very slow. A quicker system of carrying mail was tried. This was the Pony Express. The Pony Express. Mail sent by stagecoach from St. Louis to San Francisco took 25 days. Mail sent about the same distance by Pony Express took only 10 days. There was a good reason why the Pony Express was able to save so much time. The Pony Express was speedy because the horses used were very fast. These horses carried only about 10 pounds of mail. For this reason, the letters had to be written on thin paper. The Pony Express riders, like jockeys of today, were small, light men. A man who weighed more than 135 pounds could not get a job as a Pony Express rider. Interesting. If you like interesting facts like that, please subscribe to Context is Everything Media Network. I used to be a teacher, and now I'm reading, but I'll be teaching again. Here. The route of the Pony Express. The Pony Express route extended to St. Joseph, Missouri, to Sacramento, California. Each rider has his special part of the route, riding westward one day and returning eastward the next. Each horse was ridden at top speed for about 15 to 20 miles. Then a lightning change to another horse, and the rider was off again. Each rider had a route of 50 or 60 miles. At the end of this particular route, the express rider handed a bag of mail to the next rider, who continued the journey. It was like a long relay race. That is pretty interesting, isn't it? Letters by Pony Express. Letters sent by Pony Express cost the sender $5 in gold. The price was really necessary because of the large number of riders and the many swift horses that were needed for this work. The Pony Express was started in 1860. It only lasted 2 years because by that time the telegraph had been extended to California. Telegraph messages could be sent instantly. The Pony Express was no longer needed. Pony Express only lasted 2 years? Huh. Railroads. The first railroad across the country. Everyone knew the railroad ought to connect the Pacific coast to the east. Many difficulties stood in the way of building such a railroad across the country. Huge sums of money would be needed to build a railroad across the country. Money was hard to get for such a purpose. There would not be very much business for the railroad because so few people lived west of the Missouri River. To make money, railroads must carry freight and passengers. People who had money to spare would not invest it in building a railroad in a part of the country where few people lived. Consequently, it was necessary for the necessary for the United States government to help. The government did not have any too much money, but it had plenty of land. So the government agreed to give the railroad companies a certain amount of land for every mile of railroad built. The companies could sell the land and thus get money. Union Pacific, Central Pacific. 2 companies were formed to build the railroad. One was called the Central Pacific, agreed to begin work in California to build towards the east. Though another road called the Union Pacific began in Omaha in Nebraska and extended westward. The 2 roads were to meet in the far west. Building of the railroad was thrilling work. The Central Pacific started eastward from California and had special difficulties to overcome. The rails of the equipment had to be brought to California by boat around the Cape Horn. This railroad had to cross mountains and bridge deep gorges. It was built mostly by Chinese laborers, who were called coolies. This book was written in 1940. I don't know if that's a bad word. They worked hard and for very low wages. The builders of the railroad of the Union Pacific also had their troubles. These workers were mostly Irish. Many of them had fought in the Civil War. Now they had to face dangers of a different sort. There was very little water on the Great Plains. Wood for campfires was scarce. The workers were always in danger from Indian attacks. The Indians seemed to understand that the railroad was going to take from them the last of their hunting grounds. The finish of a great work. In spite of all sorts of obstacles, the building progressed. The men worked with such spirit that each day they tried to outdo what they had done the day before. At last, on May 10th, 1869, the Eastern Line met the Western Line near Ogden, Utah. It was a day of great rejoicing. A great crowd of people came to see the last spike driven to place. This spike was made of gold from California. A silver sledgehammer drove the spike into the beautifully polished railroad tie. The blows of the hammer were recorded by the telegraph, so that the entire country could know that now the East and the West were united by railroad. Celebrations were held in many cities throughout the country. In Chicago, a parade was organized. Church services were held. The old Liberty Bell, which had rung out the news of the signing of the Declaration of Independence, now announced the East was linked with the West by rails of steel. This railroad was often called the Transcontinental Railroad. Trans means across. Transcontinental is a good name for a railroad which goes across the continent. The map on page 403 shows the first Transcontinental Railroad. Oh, that's it. Have a good weekend. God bless. Goodbye. Please subscribe if you made it this far.